Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to be working on an image that would basically be for a comic book that I would like to be working on, but basically every time I try to write something, it winds up coming out horrible. Like, for example, in high school I wrote an entire novel. I actually still have this novel. It's just so awful. Like, I wound up reading it eventually, and it's just... there's something about it that I just don't understand with writing. And people tell me, oh, you need to write more than 1,000 words for a story in order to start getting good. And I've definitely written a lot more than that in order to try to get good at writing a story, like a long-held, sustained narrative, and it just doesn't work for some reason. What I like about drawing is that it's visual. I can definitely see when something is wrong, but with something like music or writing, it's not the same. Because, like, take music for example. It's basically sound and time. And yes, you can get something visual, sheet music or something like that. But, that's not the same. There's nothing that my brain can actually connect itself to. So I can't really seem to ever nail down music. And with writing, however, it's kind of different, because it's more like ideas. That's all that an entire book is, or a comic book even. It's just a series of ideas, and I understand the theory. You have to have basically you have to have the introduction, the catalyst, the rising action, the most desperate moment, and then the climax, and then the resolving action, the final little doodah that lets you know, okay, things have really changed throughout the course of the story. I understand the theory of plot structure and everything like that, but executing it is something completely different, because to me it's just ideas, just these weird ethereal thoughts that don't really give me any direction at all. Maybe at some point in time when I am a little bit more self-sufficient, I'll be able to hire somebody to write this story for me, so that I'd be able to kind of just write it, and we could kind of come up with the story together. But as of right now, I just don't think that I have the time or even the skill set to write the story. But yeah, the idea is that this is Atler. I've kind of told you guys about the character before. On a horseback, swinging a sword at somebody who's kind of lost their balance and is on the ground and such. But I've told you guys somewhat recently in some of my videos that I've been experimenting with line work, and I didn't really realize just how much I would be experimenting with the line work for this video, and it wound up getting to the point to where everything is kind of like a painterly style, and I don't like that. I don't enjoy using a painterly style. I'm kind of frustrated, because I'm trying to make my line work look different, but I definitely don't want the painterly style. So this is me trying to just kind of, in a way, get rid of my line work entirely, but that didn't really work out so well for me, because it just wound up being painterly. Now, what do I mean by painterly? Well, normally with, what I've noticed out of a lot of people that tend to paint is they start out with a silhouette, and that seems to work for them. And some people, they've got years and years worth of practice, or maybe they were introduced to artwork with a painterly sort of style, and so working with silhouettes is just totally natural for them. But for me, it just seemed like it made everything stilted, because the longer and longer I start playing around with the silhouette, the less and less organic and the less action, the less movement that thing happens to have. That silhouette just kind of loses its life. It's still an okay image, but midway through drawing it, I kind of lost all motivation to keep working on it. But I will, regardless of the fact that I've kind of gotten to the point to where I genuinely don't give a crap about this image, I am going to make it nice, you know, finished, polished, colored even. Working with this workflow, it slowed me down quite significantly, and I'm not interested in a slower workflow. There are some things that I appreciate about this workflow, but there are, and I'll get into that. But the main thing is that when I fiddle with the silhouette, everything just looks stilted, and it no longer has any life to it. It also makes it more difficult to adjust things to having a round shape if I happen to have screwed that up at some point down the line. But yeah, you know, I kind of was working with a brush that I created, and I was hoping that it would have all of the attributes that I like out of a digital brush, and all of the things that I actually liked about the pencil brush. So everything that I liked about both versions of these two experiences that I had. And it wound up being one of the worst artistic decisions that I've made, in the sense that I hated the entire artistic process. Basically, yeah, there is line work, but I wind up kind of having all of my line work as I progress further and further through the image. Like the basic sketch, I used a little bit, but as time wore on, the line work wound up being on the exact same layer as my painting layer, which I'm not entirely opposed to, but not when it's me fiddling around with the silhouette for a never-ending period of time. It just doesn't, like, the Atlar is supposed to be swinging his sword, and yet there's something about his pose that just makes it look like he's just holding the sword, in my opinion. But what I like about this is that it kind of feels like it kind of feels like sculpting in a way, and is to some extent, if you just fiddle around with different values and just keep moving your brush around, eventually you're going to find what you're looking for, which kind of kills the artistic decisions for me, at least. It just, sometimes it's like it's something that I like about the workflow, but what I don't like about that is that there's less conscious choices being made in order to get things done the way that I want. Maybe it's just simply because I'm not very familiar with this workflow or not. But ultimately, I think I'm going to just keep using the traditional digital brush that I have been using. It's just, I think what I'm going to be doing from here on out is I'm just going to, once I'm finished with all of my line work, start adding different values to the line work, maybe. Maybe that would look pretty interesting. That way, the line work is designed to be colored every bit as much as any other part of the image. I think that would actually play out pretty well. And this hand that is on the screen right here, right now, it came out looking pretty good. It's one of those sorts of things that I just started to kind of play with, you know, just kind of playing around with values using the smudge brush and moving things around. What I noticed with the smudge brush, at least inside of Affinity Photo, is that if you press too hard on your stylus, it would wind up, and I have no other way of describing it, it would wind up actually kind of tearing the actual values at the point of impact where the stylus first hits the screen, because I have a screen tablet nowadays. Okay, so it just the rest of the stroke would look good, but basically I would always have to press really lightly, otherwise the smudge brush would wind up tearing the values that I have established in specific locations where the stylus hits the screen, and that kind of agitated me. You know, the fiddling with everything to the point to where it finally looks good, it took forever. It's just every little tiny part just needs to be kind of, it just felt like everything is isolated into its own little cell, and it's just a matter of fiddling around with it, fiddling, and eventually it winds up looking right. It just, I don't really know how to really articulate it. It just didn't come out well, and it took forever. It just took freaking forever. Whereas if I just worked with line work and then started coloring it, any adjustment that I could ever need could be done much easier, it felt like. Like the grayscale, actually applying grayscale after having line work is a lot easier than just kind of trying to do the same thing all at once, I guess, is kind of what I'm frustrated with. So I don't really finish this image by the time that this video's over. Maybe I might be able to finish it by the end of the week and post, you know, the final result. But no promises there. You know, everyone's got a schedule. Everyone's got things they got to do. And I'll try to get it out by Sunday, but again, no promises. You know, at some point in time, this foot didn't look right. I knew that I wanted his foot to be foreshortened because the horse is standing on its hind legs. But there comes a point where I kind of zoom out and I look at his leg, and it just looks like really stubby. Now, how do you make a foreshortened leg look like it's longer? Because, like, if you move it down, that's not necessarily going to do anything. If you move it up, it's not necessarily going to do anything. Left or right, it's not necessarily going to do anything. But I wound up using the Liquify tool, and ultimately all I did was make different portions thinner and different portions of his leg just wider and thicker. And that made his leg look longer than it originally was. I don't know if I necessarily succeeded in making his leg look approximately as long as it should be, but I felt, I don't know, at the time I felt like it looked all right. But yeah, it's just, I mean, it looks okay. It's just, nothing about what I'm looking at on the screen right now while I'm recording this makes me think, yeah, this is an Orphan Last image. This has all the staples of Orphan Last. This is me. This is how I draw. This is how I paint. This is me. No, this doesn't have anything that appeals to me. Not in the workflow. Not in anything really. I mean, yeah, there's a few things I appreciate about the workflow, but it doesn't, like, there's no enjoyment in the process. It's just very long, very tedious, and in the end, I don't wind up with an image that looks the way that I want. So I'm starting to kind of backtrack a little bit and say, okay, well, I like the image. It didn't come out the way that I want, or at least it's still not coming out the way that I want. But I think that I'm going to go back to working with line work and just fiddle around with the line work in a different way. Who knows? I might have to. What I might do is just make my finished line work, paint it or color it basically with grayscale, and then deactivate my finished line work maybe, and or maybe even lower the saturation, apply a gradient map so that it's just a discolored version of the line work. I don't know, and then just replace the line work with something that feels like grayscale, and maybe that might be able to speed it up. I wound up actually remaking things quite a bit. Like, I would make a character's arm like 3 or 4 times. There was a lot of failed attempts. The guy that's laying down on the ground, I actually drew him out at least 3 times, it feels like. And yeah, this painterly style, normally I would make trees in a somewhat similar sort of way, but I just don't like how these trees came out because I was trying to do it as a grayscale image start to finish. and yeah, again, it just doesn't come out right. It doesn't come out looking the way that I want. I mean, it looks okay. It just doesn't look like an Orphan Last image. It doesn't look like my image. So I can do this if I wanted to, which I won't. I think that if I was if somebody were to look at this image and go, "Wow, that is cool," I would be willing to hire you for a commission to make an image like this for me. If someone were to say that, I'd be like, okay, cool. It'll be 3 times as expensive as my regular style. Just simply because it's probably going to take me 3 or 4 times the amount of time in order to get it done. This is kind of interesting, though. Like, I kind of experimented with the guy laying down on the ground quite a bit. I don't quite finish him or the background, but you can see as time develops, like, I'm just fiddling with values in order to kind of flesh out and kind of sculpt him. I kind of like that feeling a little bit, the sculpting feeling, but I'm not sculpting, so there's no reason for me to spend that much time sculpting an image. I know that when I say that I'm working in perspective, you're sculpting a 3-dimensional shape on a 2-dimensional object, but like this is like Play-Doh on a 2-dimensional surface, and the feeling is not the same as drawing in perspective. I would rather draw in perspective any day of the week than have this Bob Ross sort of whatever feeling. And here, you just saw me, I was really careful with all the values that I applied here and there. And then, I started to kind of brush on a darker line, or a darker, larger brush over top of all of the well-defined sort of shapes. That was kind of cool. I kind of do a little bit more of that. I kind of keep going back and backtracking, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about there. And that's something that's kind of interesting, where it's like, okay, first you define your shapes, and then, and somewhat with those shapes, you define kind of generally what the shading and the lighting is on them, but then, like, you get a big brush and kind of wipe it onto the surface to kind of get a general feel of what the lighting on that object happens to be. That's something that's kind of interesting, but since it happens to be interesting doesn't mean that I really enjoyed the workflow. I mean, it just took freaking forever just to do anything. But yeah, I mean, when I zoom out, I look at the image, I'm like, that's pretty cool looking. I mean, it looks cool, but yeah, it's just the whole workflow. It doesn't feel enjoyable. And if it's not enjoyable, then the whole process just winds up being a chore. So this week's video was just tedious, frustrating. I found myself oftentimes just kind of losing all motivation. And then watching the television show Happy, which surprisingly is really cool. It's the closest thing to having a Max Payne television series. If you guys ever played that video game, Max Payne, it's the closest thing to that, and yet there's this cartoon flying horse inside of it. It's freaking weird. And I've never seen a television show with cinematography that's more innovative. Like the camera angles that they choose to tell the story is just absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, I would distract myself with that show as often as possible. After like spending 8 or 9 hours drawing this thing for a day and coming back to it and trying to stay motivated for this image. Yeah. But anyways, so we're coming up towards the end of the video. The final weekly report, I guess, of this image is going to be coming up onto the screen really soon here. And here we go. And you can kind of see it looks good, but things kind of look stilted. Even still, the proportions on the guy laying down on the ground, especially from his hip down. The foreshortening doesn't come out looking right. And some of that is because of the stilted nature of the silhouettes and such, but some of the weirdness is because it's unfinished as well, and it's hard to figure out what to do about it. And so, yeah. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more participation with my community, feel free to join my Discord. A link to my Discord is in the video description below. If you'd like to support this channel, there's an image of my mascot in the upper right corner of the screen. It leads to my Patreon. Any support would be much appreciated. And if you guys have enjoyed this content, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now.